Welcome to Bringing Dreams and Miracles Together, the podcast where we explore the heart of family building through surrogacy and egg donation. I'm Stacy Swiderski, founder and owner of Family Source Consultants, and I'm thrilled to have you with us for this next episode. Today, our incredible client development advisor, Chris Gow, sits down with Melissa Brisman, a distinguished reproductive attorney, to discuss an essential topic: surrogates' rights and protections under the Child Parent Security Act in New York. They'll also dive into the importance of independent legal representation, the differences between traditional and gestational surrogacy, and key insights for surrogates to ensure a smooth and rewarding journey with their intended parents. It's an episode filled with valuable information, so let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Family Source Consultants podcast. My name is Chris Gow, and I'm the client development advisor at Family Source Consultants, and I will be your host today. So, in this episode, we'll be talking about surrogacy in New York, but from a surrogate's perspective. And we have a very special guest, Melissa Brisman, joining us today. Melissa
Hi.
is. Hello, Melissa. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, absolutely. I was actually just going to give a one-line introduction about yourself, but I will have you take over. Please introduce yourself and your firm to us.
Oh, great. So my name obviously is Melissa Brisman, and a licensed practicing attorney in New York. I'm actually licensed in 6 states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Texas. So I know a lot about the laws around the country. I own a law firm that I founded in 1999, so it's been a long time. That
Mhm.
focuses exclusively on reproductive law. Surrogacy is the main area of law, but we do sperm, egg, embryo donation. We also do adoptions. I actually owned for 20 years, but sold 5 years ago, a surrogacy agency as well. So I do know that perspective as well. But
Yeah,
I'm
that's amazing.
happy to be here on the podcast and hope we can get some people educated and interested in the topic.
Exactly. That's you're truly an expert, and that's why we have such a pleasure to have you join us today to, spread your knowledge and your wisdom to the people who are interested, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to have one from the surrogate's perspective because we have so many podcasts from the intended parent's perspective that it's a lot harder for the surrogate to get information. And anybody who also maybe like the surrogate spouse or family might want to listen in as well. So I think that's great.
Exactly, exactly. Okay, shall we dive in?
Absolutely. Ask away.
Okay. So, speaking of New York, surrogacy, we can't not talk about the CPSA, also known as the New York State Child Parent Security Act, right? So that is what legalizes gestational surrogacy and allows surrogates to receive compensation. Are there any legal requirements on how or how much a surrogate can be compensated from your experience?
Well, each state is going to be different. So just focusing on New York, um,
Hmm.
there isn't, I mean, it has to be reasonable compensation, but there isn't really a limit or, definition of what is reasonable. So realistically, you can pay what you're comfortable with to a surrogate, but New York has a lot of specific requirements as a statute. It's actually one of the most protective for surrogates in the United States. New
Hmm.
York is one of the only states that requires the agency to be licensed if it's
Yep.
operating in New York. And it has a very long licensing policy. And I would say when I mean long, it takes a long time to get licensed. It's not easy. And
Hmm.
most agencies actually don't undergo it because it's such a pain, which I'm sure you know about.
Yep, absolutely. We know very well because, I mean, Family Source Consultants is one of the agencies that are licensed in New York. So we went through that whole process, and it sure is a very strict and complicated process. But, we're happy we're licensed in New York so we can work with surrogates that reside in the city of New York, and we can help more parents find their ideal matches, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great. You're one of a small number. I would say it's less probably than 10% of the surrogacy agencies in the US are licensed in New York.
Absolutely, I think so. So under the CPSA, what are surrogates' rights and responsibilities?
So surrogates have a lot of rights in New York. First of all, they have complete control of their medical care, meaning they get to choose their physician, they get to choose the number of embryos transferred, they get to choose their method of delivery, whether or not to terminate a pregnancy. That doesn't mean
Hmm.
that we can't put what is their intention, like our intention is to deliver at this hospital, our intention is to undergo a termination if there's a life-threatening, but ultimately the surrogate is going to have the choice to make those ultimate decisions. But of course, in any agreement or match, you want to make sure that they're still on the same page, right? Even though she has those
Yep.
rights. So I like to
Hmm.
clarify that. She also
Okay.
has the right, now compensated carriers, which is what we're talking about because you're an agency, have different
Hmm.
requirements than what we call our altruistic, meaning they're not doing it for any compensation, which is not
Hmm.
going to be what we're talking about today. So when you hear me talking about the law may be different if you're what we call an altruistic or non-compensated carrier. But a
Hmm.
compensated carrier has the right to $750,000 of life insurance, and that
Hmm.
they must be provided with that. It's not a waivable. They have the right to
Hmm.
ask for disability. They can waive that because obviously you're not going to be able to get disability insurance on everybody. Like if you have a part-time job where you make $100 a week, it may be just better to replace lost wages than buy a disability policy.
Right.
But they do have
Right.
the right to ask for that. Um,
Hmm.
they get mental health counseling, legal counseling throughout the term of the agreement. They also get life insurance for up to 1 year after delivery. The same with health insurance, comprehensive
Hmm.
health insurance. Um,
Hmm.
they have that right as well. Now their responsibilities, right? The contract is enforceable if it meets all of this criteria. And there's something
Hmm.
called the Bill of Rights, which is attached to every contract. And if you go to the New York State website, you could see a sample Bill of Rights, which has
Okay.
everything that I stated in it. But obviously, the responsibilities, it will be an enforceable contract if it's done right by a New York attorney. And
Hmm.
in there, they have to take care of themselves. They have to respond to questions from the intended parents. They have to treat the baby with care that's in the fetus that's in their body. And so their
Absolutely.
responsibilities are to like responsibly manage the pregnancy. And I find
Hmm.
in most cases, a lot of things are communication. You want to keep the lines of communication open.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And from intended parents' perspective, I'm sure a lot of surrogates can understand because someone else is carrying your baby, and a lot of parents, throughout this process feel certain level of unknownness, I would say, which is like wanting to know what's going on, and that's why it's so important to have good communication between the parents and the surrogate. So the parents always feel like they're in the loop and they know what's going on with the pregnancy, and if the surrogate is doing well. And surrogates, I feel like from the surrogate's perspective, it's also good to know that the intended parents are there to support you and they care about not just the baby but also you and your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it comes down to perspective, right? So a lot
Mhm.
of time the parents are anxious. And what I always tell the surrogate is it's good to establish a line of communication and
Mhm.
pattern, right? So if you know your intended mother is extremely anxious and wants to talk to you all the time, but you can't do that, maybe establish, okay, on Wednesday nights at 5 o'clock,
Mhm.
that's when my kids are at karate. I could talk to you for half an hour on that date. Let's make a standing appointment Wednesday at 5 o'clock. So,
Yep, yep.
well, I mean, my kids are a lot older. My oldest is going to be 27. So it's a long time ago that I had kids through surrogacy, and I had 3 kids through surrogacy. And what I did with my carrier, there was not internet like there is now at that time. I mean, it
Mhm.
was,
Right.
but one of them used to text me every morning and just say, I'm alive. And 2 seconds, but she knew I had a lot of anxiety. So she would just wake up and text,
Mhm.
I'm alive, I feel good. And this way I wouldn't be like bothering her all the time, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
And with
absolutely. That
one
is so
second of
cute.
her day. And so
Mhm.
sometimes a lot of it is expectations. Like if you know that you're anxious, maybe tell your carrier, hey, please don't take any of this personally. I'm just a little
Mhm.
anxious. And
Mhm.
if you're gonna be out of town and or not near your phone for 2 days or your email, it's probably a good idea to tell your intended parents, hey, I'm going to be inaccessible because I'm on a flight, I'm in a remote area, but everything's fine. You know,
Mhm.
a lot of times misunderstandings are communication. And in this world of texting and emailing, it's even worse because you can't tell anybody's reaction over a text, right?
Absolutely, you're 100% right.
So sometimes you got to pick up the phone, which I know this generation doesn't like as much.
Mhm.
Um, so I always tell people to, if you're reading a text and you're not understanding it, don't just keep texting back, right? Like make a time to talk.
Yep, absolutely. I think, it's important to clarify whether you have questions or you have confusion or you're not sure about the other party's tone or meaning. Just call or sometimes FaceTime. It's so much more direct that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And cultures too, because you got a lot of international clients, right? And
Mhm.
culturally, they may behave more formally than Americans, I find a lot of times. And sometimes the carrier just needs to get used to that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It just depends on the personalities of each party, and no matter what, um, things will turn out okay in the end. And one of I think this is where the agency's expertise comes in, because when we're matching parents and surrogates, it's not just, oh, these parents are looking for a surrogate, and like, say that's a good candidate and in this area, and this surrogate is willing to carry for a couple like this, but there's a lot more. Their personalities, do we think their personalities may be a match? And do we think, their values may align? And there's so much more behind the scenes that we take to consideration before suggesting a match.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, part of the process is making sure that they're a good match on termination. These are legal issues too, right? So even though the
Hmm.
carrier has the right to terminate, we certainly don't want a pro-life carrier with somebody who would want to terminate. That's just not a good match, right?
Exactly.
So in New York, right, you have this enforceable contract, but then when they're 3 or 4 months pregnant, you want to also go and to the court. You will go to the court and you get a parentage order so that the parents are listed as the parents on the birth certificate. So a couple more things that you should know about New York is though, although you have a lot of international clients in New York, according to the statute, international surrogacy is not allowed. So the parents have to be US citizens.
Hmm.
Technically the parents are supposed to reside in New York, but that has been pretty much waived uniformly as not a substantial issue by the judges. But
Hmm.
international parents it's probably not a great choice for international couples to be matched with carriers. But
In New
once they're
York.
3 or 4 months pregnant, we do apply to the court so the carrier doesn't have to worry about being issued a birth certificate with her name on it, which is also another
Mhm.
protection for the surrogate.
Yeah, absolutely. And since we're on that topic, and there is something I wanted to ask you about. Like, sometimes surrogates do have concerns. What if the parents refuse to take the baby after birth? And is there a possibility at all the surrogate would be responsible for the child if the
Not under
parents,
New York
refuse?
law. Under New York
Mm-hmm.
law, the parents are the parents. Now, anybody can do something illegal, right? So if the
Mm-hmm.
parents don't show up at the hospital to pick up the baby,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you could file a complaint and then, you know, the Child Protective Services will remove the baby from their care and place the baby for adoption. I mean, that would be almost unheard of in a surrogacy where someone's spending all this money to have a baby. But
Mm-hmm.
just to say, like, we can't force anyone to come pick up a baby. I've never had an experience like this, but it would not be the surrogate's baby.
Yeah, exactly. We have never ever seen this situation in the last 18 years, and I personally have never heard of this happening either. But I can certainly understand why this is a concern for someone who may be interested in becoming a surrogate, just because it's possibly, technically, it's a possible scenario. So if I were to be a surrogate, I probably want to have some answers about this. So I'm so glad we got to address this today.
Yeah, and one of the great things about being a surrogate in New York is that health insurance in the 50 states differs by the state's use of what we call the open market Obamacare, right? Um,
Mhm,
so for instance, there are only a few states where pregnancy is a change in life event, right?
mhm,
So for instance, if you get pregnant in Pennsylvania and you were on insurance that had an exclusion for a surrogate pregnancy, and then you're pregnant, you can't just switch if there's not an open enrollment period.
Right,
Right?
right.
But
Mm-hmm.
in New York, pregnancy is considered a change in life event. So if you have an insurance that's not so great, it covers pregnancy, but it's not so great, you could wait until you're pregnant to switch because it's considered a
Mm.
change in life event, and you can actually get new insurance upon confirmation of pregnancy.
I see. That is such a great benefit.
Yeah, and also under the Child Parent Security Act, they do get their health insurance must be paid for up to a year after birth. If
Yeah, that is also a very unique perk in the city of New York because, as far as I know, most states require up to 6 months after birth of coverage on the surrogate, but in New York is a
Yeah,
year, right?
most states don't really specify how long, that it just has
Mm,
to be for the
okay,
pregnancy. I
okay.
think the industry standard, if it's not in New York, is to give them 3 months and then 6 months if there's complications. A year is a very long time only because most complications do arise in the first three
Mm,
months.
yes, exactly. Okay. Well, can we also talk about traditional surrogacy versus gestational surrogacy, because that is something we do hear from potential surrogates, and they ask, "Oh, what is traditional surrogacy?" And like, sometimes I hear the term, but I don't understand it. Can you please tell us the difference between traditional and gestational surrogacy?
Absolutely. So traditional surrogacy is also called genetic surrogacy, and it is where the woman who is carrying the baby is also providing the egg. And usually it's done by what we call artificial insemination, where the sperm is placed into the uterus, and then the egg will fertilize inside the womb, and the baby will be the genetic baby biologically related to the person carrying. What we call gestational surrogacy, or just surrogacy, because we usually don't say traditional anymore, is just, and sometimes in some states we call it gestational carrier, is
Hmm.
where the woman carrying the baby has an egg from a third party, right? So the egg is donor egg and donor sperm in her body. It's not her husband's sperm, it's not her egg, it's not her partner's sperm. It's from the intended parents, meaning it's either the egg and sperm of the intended parents or donors that they got from elsewhere.
Hmm.
Genetic surrogacy or traditional surrogacy is done, but very limited. Um,
Okay.
in most states, it is not legal for compensation. It is not legal in New York for compensation.
Hmm.
It can be done in almost every state if there's no compensation and no binding agreement to give up the baby. Meaning, if somebody did it for the friend, didn't have any payment, they would have to place the baby. Now, Massachusetts has a new statute that's coming into effect on January 1 that will allow genetic surrogacy for pay. Most states, again, do not. And it is very uncommon for the psychological link, right, to have both womb and egg in the same person.
Absolutely. It certainly complicates things. And, just because the carrier, the surrogate, is also the biological mother of the child, and it truly just further complicates, the parentage. And if the surrogate has a change of heart, decides to keep the child or decides to claim, parentage, it gets into kind of a complicated situation.
Yeah, absolutely. In most states, the carrier, or I would say the surrogate, right? The traditional
Hmm.
surrogate has the right for a certain number of days to say that she wants to still parent the baby. So if it was,
Wow.
let's say, intended father's sperm and her egg, then they would share custody of the baby as if they
Mhm.
were divorced. And obviously, that's not what you want in this kind of arrangement.
No, absolutely not. And that is why it's so important for both parties to work with legal counsels to, establish clear, I guess, a clear contract and, outlining who is going to be the legal parent and how things are going to work, how much the surrogate is going to be compensated if there's compensation involved. So, can you tell us a little bit about the benefits of a surrogate having her own legal counsel? And what should a surrogate expect to discuss with her legal counsel during that phase?
Yeah, so you always want to have an independent attorney that you choose, right?
Mhm.
So the agency can give you a list, and usually those are all independent attorneys. And if obviously you want to choose your own attorney that's not on the list, you can do that too, but you should definitely make sure they're well versed in reproductive law. Just like you don't want to go to a
Absolutely.
heart doctor if you have a problem with your eyes. You don't want to go to
Mhm.
a real estate attorney for reproductive, right? And
Mhm.
lawyer is going to go over the contract. I usually like six main things, and you could always go to our website, which is reproductivelawyer.com, and there is a whole section for surrogates, what to look for in my contract that you could read. But the main things you want to make sure is that not only that you have compensation, but you have risk of loss things, like what
Mhm.
happens if I'm out of work? What happens if I have a medical complication? What happens if I lose my uterus? Like all of these things, right? You want to make sure now it's not as important, but you want to make sure your status on vaccines is the same as the
Mhm.
parent. If you don't want to get a COVID vaccine, but the parents mandate a COVID vaccine, we want to make sure that that's ironed out before, right? We want to talk about communication. A lot of surrogates
Mhm.
use social media, they post. What can you post? Obviously, you can post about yourself, but maybe the parents don't want pictures of them or their names, or they don't mind. So we want
Right.
to go over that. We want
Mhm.
to go over like expectation, like do they expect instant responses, like, or is it going to be once a week communication, right?
Mhm.
Payment should always be completely detailed. So like if you get lost wages, how much do you get? What kind of proof do you need? Right? We want to go over, that as well. Travel is a huge thing, right? So in a
Yes.
pregnancy like this, towards the end, they may not be able to leave their state for legal purposes, and we want to make sure that they're okay with that and that
Mhm.
they don't have any out of country travel planned, because going out of the country and giving birth is a legal problem, right? Because transfer
Mhm.
custody of the baby. So there's a lot for the attorney to look for, and an experienced attorney is going to know what the big things are right away for us.
Mhm. Yeah. We are so, we're so blessed to have such experienced attorneys like yourself to, be there helping our surrogates, helping our intended parents navigate through this complicated process.
Yeah, we also like if I represent intended parents, I like to let them make sure that don't forget that this is a person who has a life besides your baby, right? So
Mhm.
like we have to tell them about the travel because they may not know that. Like,
Right.
and if they have something to do, the transfer date might have to be worked around, right? Like, so if they have a
Mhm.
wedding to go to in June and it's May, maybe we're not doing a transfer until July so they can go to their wedding, in Puerto Rico and get that out of the way. And
Mhm.
so certain things, have to be discussed.
Yeah, 100%. Surrogacy truly is a two-way street. Mutual respect is one of the key factors for success because if the parents feel like I am paying my surrogate and I can have everything my way, it is going to make things very difficult. And on the other hand, if the surrogate feels like I am being a surrogate, I'm helping them, I can have everything my way, that will also complicate things. I think that, the most important thing is communication, open communication and respect for each other. And I truly think, we're all human. We understand that we all have a life, and as long as things are communicated and discussed in advance or to the best of each other's knowledge, and I really do think surrogacy could be such a great bridge to connect two lives and two families and bring someone the gift of parenthood.
Yeah, absolutely. Expectations. You want to set expectations from the start.
Yeah. I think we got to cover a lot of things today, actually, but obviously there is so much more that we didn't get to cover. And I'm sure our audience out there will probably have more questions. And if you do have any questions that we didn't get to cover today, please feel free to reach out to Family Source Consultants, to Melissa Brisman. We'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And last but not least, before you go, Melissa, do you have any advice to people who are interested in becoming a surrogate, especially in the state of New York?
Absolutely. I would say make sure that you do your research, right? Because it is a great, wonderful thing to do, but it is also a very important job and it's time consuming and it can be at times very wonderful, but could also be stressful. So if you decide to do it, make sure that it's what you want to do and gather all your resources, listen to podcasts, go to seminars, and
Mhm.
hopefully you'll have a good decision for you and your family.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, Melissa. It's such a pleasure to have you. And our audience out there, we hope you find today's episode helpful. Again, do not hesitate to reach out if you're ever thinking about being a surrogate. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
All right, bye bye.